If you're somebody who has a hard time feeling their glutes and hamstrings when performing any type of deadlift and you only feel your lower back, then you should probably watch the rest of this video. So any type of deadlift exercise, whether it's a Romanian deadlift, a straight leg deadlift, a trap bar deadlift, a sumo deadlift, it is a hip hinge exercise. So when people are doing deadlift movements, why is it that we feel our lower backs? We feel our lower backs because they are not hinging at the hip. They are not anteriorly tilting at the pelvis or posteriorly tilting at the pelvis. If you feel your spine during any deadlift variation, chances are you are not using your hips and you have a tendency to use your spine when you're doing the exercise. And we're gonna break down step by step as to what do you need to do to improve your functional deficits and your movement patterns so you can get the most out of a deadlift. When we begin teaching someone how to hip hinge and to perform a deadlift, we often give them a PVC pipe so that they can have points of contact with their spine and their pelvis. So using a PVC pipe like this is allowing us to ensure that we are not flexing at the spine as we begin to lean over. So again, this is a tactile feedback tool to ensure that you are actually able to anteriorly tilt at the pelvis. So an issue that a lot of people run into when they're doing deadlift variations is as they lean over, you'll see if I don't tilt at the pelvis, I lose contact with the pole against my tailbone. I am now rounding, I'm flexing at the lumbar spine. If I do not have the ability to anteriorly tilt my pelvis or extend my lumbar spine, then I cannot effectively lengthen the glute and hamstring, so all the load has to be placed on my spine and my lower back. So a way we can address this is by simply practicing spine segmentation and anterior pelvic tilt. So in a traditionally done cat-cow, in the cat-cow you'll see people exploring full spine flexion as well as exploring full spine extension. While this is a great movement and should be done regardless, we can add more intentionality and specificity to this practice. So by doing spine segmentation, we are looking to practice the movement of individual vertebrae in our spine. So I'm beginning by anteriorly tilting my pelvis and extending my spine, and all I am trying to do is create independent movement between each of my lumbar vertebrae as I go up into the thoracic spine. The focus is not the upper back here because we are simply doing deadlifts. So the focus is being able to tilt the pelvis posteriorly, being able to flex the lumbar spine, and then move into the rest of the spine, the thoracic and cervical spine. But again, because this is for deadlifting, we need to practice the ability of anteriorly tilting our pelvis separately from extending the spine. They are independent joint structures and they should be treated as such. So if we don't know how to initiate anterior pelvic tilt through a deadlift, you're gonna practice doing a spine segmentation cat-cow. So you're in full spine flexion, as much curvature as you can get, and then begin tilting the pelvis. You should feel the upper glutes and the lower back begin contracting as you transition from posterior tilt to anterior tilt. As I get to full anterior tilt, I'm gonna begin moving up my lumbar spine and practice segmentation through the lumbar spine as I go to the thoracic. Again, you can start at the bottom and begin tilting the pelvis posteriorly, flexing the lumbar spine, and then working your way up. And again, we would do this for several rounds, simply just gaining awareness. We're trying to contract tissue in this region so that we can more effectively execute the deadlift. So one of the major contributors to a deadlift is having sufficient hip flexion. Having sufficient hip flexion just means that you can lean over through the hips and pelvis and allowing your glutes and hamstrings to lengthen. If you have the inability to lengthen the glute and hamstring, you are going to default and round at the spine. So we're gonna do isometric contractions at length to be able to contract the stretched tissue that you need to perform your deadlift. This can be done in a variety of different ways. One way to do this is simply putting your foot up on like a door frame or some type of elevated surface. So what I'm doing here is flexing my right hip against an immobile object. All I am looking to do is feel the lengthened tissue of hip flexion. So when my femur, my thigh is in the front side of my pelvis, my glute and hamstring is at length. The inability to lengthen and load that tissue is what's ultimately going to make your spine take more of the load when you're doing a deadlift. So if we're trying to train the hip in the stretch position, we're going to put ourselves in a passive stretch similar to this. So what we're looking to do is anteriorly tilt the pelvis, meaning I'm trying to extend my lumbar spine a bit. You can play around with degrees of external and internal rotation depending on what your hip needs, and that might vary from hip to hip. As I sit here in this stretch, I'm trying to breathe into it. I'm trying to get my butt a little bit closer to the point of contact. But again, if you don't have this much hip flexion, you could simply scoot back a little bit further and work within your current capabilities, your current range of motion. So again, we're looking to get the deepest passive stretch we can in hip flexion, and then we're gonna begin the isometric contraction that's gonna drive a lot of tension in the tissue you struggle to lengthen. So from this position, without moving my pelvis or my spine, I'm maintaining that anterior tilt and I still feel the stretch. I'm gonna begin driving my leg into the pole or a door frame, wherever you have your leg elevated against. As I drive my leg into the pole, I begin feeling this stretched tissue transition into a contraction. It is a different sensation. That is the training stimulus. We are driving tension into the lengthened tissue to improve your neurology so you can more effectively execute the deadlift movement. So again, we started with the passive stretch. I am driving into the pole, so if someone came up next to me and tried pulling my leg off, they would not be able to because there's downward pressure coming in through my heel. I can again add degrees of external or internal rotation, and that's gonna feel different because I am now contracting a different line of tissue depending on the orientation my hip is in. And again, one is not inherently better than the other. It's what your hip needs, and trial and error is one approach in how we can figure out what each hip specifically needs depending on the person. So again, we're driving our heel into the ground to contract the lengthened tissue, the glute and hamstring, which are supposed to be the prime movers on a deadlift. We're generally gonna do this for 90 seconds to 2 minutes, just marinating in tension before we move on to our next movement. So we started with spine segmentation and practicing anterior pelvic tilt. We went ahead and practiced contracting the lengthened tissue in straight leg hip flexion to recruit our glutes and hamstrings, because ultimately that's what's going to contribute to the deadlift rather than the spinal cord. We use the PVC pipe as a training wheel, as tactile feedback, so that you can go ahead and use it so that when you begin flexing at the spine, you can anterior tilt and extend and maintain positioning as you explore the end range of motion. If you've graduated from that, we can increase the technicalities of the deadlift by doing a kickstand RDL. So you're leading into doing a one-legged, a single leg RDL, unilateral RDL. So when we're doing this, we're gonna have the leading leg be the working foot. The back leg's extended with the toes extended. We're gonna put the pole on our back and put almost all of our body weight on the working leg, which would be the front leg in this instance. As I lean over, I am now feeling all of those tendencies we discussed. The wanting to posteriorly tilt, I am gonna be anteriorly tilting. As I lean over, I feel my foot pressure becoming a bit uneven as I put more weight in my big toe rather than my heel and my little toe. So I'm gonna course correct and shift back a little bit. I find anterior tilt. So as of right now, almost all my weight is in this standing leg. I have my pelvis anteriorly tilted. From here, I am gonna extend out of it and try to squeeze my butt to pull myself up. And so again, when we're doing unilateral deadlifts like this, we are exposing all of the components that contribute to the deadlift. So as I lean over, my back leg has maybe 10% of my weight on it. I have the pole here to ensure I'm anteriorly tilting at the pelvis. I have a soft bend to my knee. My knee is not completely locked out. Because I'm doing this in a kickstand fashion, I am feeling my foot pressure change relative to the instability I have in my foot or in my hip. So this is exposing the foot pressure deficit that I would not feel if I was doing this bilaterally. So again, we practice doing the hip hinge with the pole, where we can expose the anterior tilt and the foot pressure and the hip flexion. We go ahead and move into a kickstand RDL to further complicate the movement, so we can add more complexity and increase the intensity of the training. If you're able to graduate from that, where again, you can extend the spine and anteriorly tilt the pelvis, you can flex the hip and feel lengthen tissue and then contract to get out of that position. And you can feel your foot having even pressure through the big toe, the little toe, and the heel. We would then move into a single leg RDL and then load it with dumbbells, kettlebells, a free weight, a barbell, you name it. So if we're gonna do a unilateral RDL, a single leg RDL, stability is everything here, and it's gonna expose your functional deficits. So as I stand with one leg, I initially feel the tendency for my foot to begin shifting. This is gonna train your foot pressure and the ability to evenly distribute your load, your body weight, or the weight you're using. So from here, my back leg is straight, my knees softly bent. And as I begin leaning over, I am maintaining the anterior pelvic tilt that the pole is keeping me in check for. And again, I feel my foot pressure being exposed significantly when I am doing a unilateral version. But again, I feel the opening side of my hip lengthen, and then I contract back out of it. And so again, we can increase the complexity a couple different ways with this, and this would be the logical progression. We use the PVC pipe with both legs bilaterally to see where our deficits are and prime the movement. We go ahead and do anterior pelvic tilt with spine extension through the practice of spine segmentation. Then we went ahead and trained hip flexion in the lengthened position by doing an isometric contraction up against a door frame or any type of immobile object. We come back and again practice the deadlift. We could train the components of the deadlift, and now we're practicing the movement of the deadlift, internal training to external training. We use the PVC pipe again and we put it all together. You master that movement. We go to a kickstand RDL, where all of the weight is on the standing leg, the leading leg. I feel the lengthened tissue. I feel the anterior pelvic tilt. I feel my tendencies with foot pressure. As I feel this length, I am using that tissue to come up and contract. As I master that, we go ahead and increase the complexity of the movement that demands the movement by going on one leg with no kickstand. And as I lean over, I'm looking to feel all of those things coming together. Anterior pelvic tilt with spine extension, flexion of the hip, my glute hamstring is lengthened, and I feel my foot pressure being relatively even to keep me stable, and then I can come up and contract. If you are able to do all of those effectively, then I see no reason that you shouldn't be able to load a deadlift productively. If you still find yourself, when you add additional load, rounding at the spine rather than being able to bias your glutes and hamstrings, then you need to improve your functional deficits by doing more internal training before you go ahead and load your body by promoting poor movement patterns that will eventually lead to a repetitive motion injury.